Yeah, Dr. Kikuchi.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we are almost coming to the time.
Yeah.
There is some update about Professor Urata um, that he had to rush to the hospital,
Hmm.
but he was keen to even join from there. I don't know how, but whether he can or cannot, I'm not very sure.
Hmm.
So, if he's able to join, it will be what do you call a bonus for us, I guess.
Okay.
But maybe we should start the session because he has shared his presentation or his message uh, to to us through a presentation. So we will
Hmm.
see how it goes.
Yeah.
And
Can
so,
I ask you,
with your permission, I will start.
yeah, can I just ask who are the main participants of this seminar?
Okay. So we have all the type of people who are both alumni of this institute as well as students,
Yeah.
and professors from this institute also are there in in the audience. Plus, we have a wide range of people from various walks of life, including industrialists,
Hmm.
academic, other students from outside our college, and so on. So it's a wide audience, and we will also be looking forward to their questions. So, what I will try and do is I will first introduce the topic as well as the speakers, both of you.
Yeah.
And then you will get about 15 minutes each. If he's not joining, you may take a slightly longer time to give perspective about this topic.
Yeah.
Um, and this will be followed by some questions,
Yeah.
which I will moderate.
Okay.
And the last section will be a Q&A
Yeah.
from the audience.
Yeah.
So we will go with that as the structure.
Yeah.
Um, so with your permission, I will start.
Yes, please.
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon. Good afternoon, good evening to those of you who are joined from India, Japan, Singapore, and Europe. And very good morning to those of you who have joined us from the US. My name is Saideep Ratnam, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of MIJSC at IIM Bangalore. MIJSC stands for Mizuho India Japan Study Center, and this is a center of excellence at IIM, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, which is dedicated to fostering the collaboration between India and Japan across all the dimensions: academia, industry, as well as the policymakers, and of course, society. We are delighted to welcome you all to MIJSC's 13th webinar in the panel discussion series and 34th webinar in the overall speaker plus panel format. So, considering the the origins of this webinar series, as I was explaining minutes before, the format is having four parts. First, I will set the context for the webinar, followed by the panelists themselves giving an overview of the topic for a few minutes, for 15 to 20 minutes each. This will be followed by a discussion between moderator, which is me, and the panelists. And finally, we will have audience Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have some questions or thoughts, please keep putting it as and when it occurs to you. It will be addressed in the last section of this webinar. Let me start with a very brief introduction about our center. As I explained, MIJSC is a CO Center of Excellence at IIM, which is to bring in a close connect between academia, industry, and government of the two countries. And the focus is basically to strengthen uh, India and Japan bonds by promoting linkages between academia, industry, policy, and the society in general. Let me introduce to you now the two panelists who will be. One of them is already there, Dr. Kikuchi, and the other panelists would also probably join because he had a medical emergency and had to go to the hospital. But he was kind enough or keen enough to show that he would like to be there in this webinar. Let us play it by the ear as the time goes. I will introduce both the speakers. Of course, Dr. Tomoo Kikuchi is a leading authority on international macroeconomics. And he is a director of the Institute of Japan in the global economy at Waseda University, which is a leading university in Japan. With prior faculty appointments of Dr. Kikuchi in top institutions, including the National University of Singapore and Korea University, as well as MIT. He was a visiting professor there, and Kyoto University, of course, within Japan. And he brings together an unmatched regional insight and also a global perspective on topics of macroeconomics. His research combines both rigorous theory as well as real world policy perspectives. And his work has appeared in premier economic journals, such as the Journal of Economic Theory and the Journal of Money, Credit, and Banking. He is a very trusted voice in economic policy circles, and he serves as in the editorial boards as well as regularly advises on issues of intersection of trade, finance, and regions of the globe. Briefly, the second panelist, Professor Shujiro Urata. He is again Japan's very respected economist in the field of international trade and economic integration. He is a professor emeritus at the same university, Waseda University, and he holds very senior advisory role at RIETI, JCER, and IDE JETRO, and he is currently serving as the president of East Asian Economic Association. With advanced degrees in Stanford, as well as distinguished career, includes positions at the World Bank and Brookings Institution, and he has shaped very key discussions on trade and development across Asia and also beyond Asia. His extensive publications span global value chains, SME developments, regional trade frameworks, and making him a sort of a go-to expert on economic architecture of East Asia and also the evolving landscape of globalization um, across the world. We are indeed lucky to have such an eminent set of panelists to discuss this very hot and topical issue today. We are hoping that Professor Urata, whether directly or indirectly, will be able to join this. Otherwise, we will have him again on another forum. But we will have the pleasure and privilege of Professor Kikuchi for this session. As regards the webinar itself, let me take a few minutes to set the context and give an overview of the topic and why we have chosen this particular topic and, of course, this panel. The Everybody, we are all aware of this resurgence of tariff wars in 2025. And I think this signals a decisive redefinition of globalization, so to speak. Because what was once characterized by liberalized trade amongst countries, open markets, and also integrated supply chains is now giving way to a very fragmented, politicized, and security driven global economy, which is a very different ball game altogether from what it used to be even a year before. The escalating US triggered trade conflict and the extension of punitive tariffs to even traditional allies has triggered a global retreat from multilateralism and is accelerating the shift towards what we can now term as selective globalization. In this new phase of selective globalization, we will have to explore what is reshaping and how is it going to reshape the foundations of global trade. And for example, the imposition of 25% tariffs on the Japanese auto industry. This has created disrupted the core pillar of Japan's export-led economy over the last almost 4.5, 5 decades, and is affecting the manufacturing, logistics, and even sector-wide profitability of many of these companies uh, of Japan. But I think the similar stories abound in all other countries, including, of course, India and other developing countries, our neighbors on both sides. Broadly, therefore, I think the tariff environment is distorting trade flows. It is driving supply chain realignments, and it is forcing companies to reassess their own global operations. Input costs are rising, and investment confidence is waning. And access to foreign markets is becoming uh, less open and more politicized. All this turmoil which is happening around us is fragmenting the economy, global economy, into blocks which are competing with each other, not necessarily on the economic front alone. And also, the rule based trading system is getting undermined, particularly for smaller and developing nations' economies, but also for all economies, including powerful economies like Japan. And this webinar will try and examine this hot and topical issue. How tariff wars are not just economic events, but they are structural shifts that are fundamentally redrawing the map of globalization with long term consequences for trade, for investment, and even for geopolitical alignment between nations. Now, let us seek the views of the panelists, starting with Professor Kikuchi on the state of economic impact of tariff wars, implications for countries that are overly dependent on exports, but also countries which are developing, and a future outlook for global trade architecture as a whole. So, Dr. Kikuchi, can you please start?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ratnam, for the kind introduction and laying down today's topic excellently.
Thank you.
First, I would like to thank the Mizuho India Japan Study Center at IIMB for inviting me to talk on the pressing issues that make the hotline every day. I'm expecting to participate in this panel alongside Professor Urata, whom I respect very much. Professor Urata is a role model for those of us in Japan who study international economic relationships. I hope he will be able to join us later today. Otherwise, the pressure is all on me. So I hope I don't disappoint you. I'm a macroeconomist with interests in how the global economy affects individual countries' development. So my comments today will be at the macro level, as I don't have expertise in any industry or sector. Let me first talk about how I understand the intention of Trump's tariff policies. President Trump's objective is to solve the twin deficits, trade and fiscal deficits of the United States. Twin deficits of the United States started to emerge after the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. We know his argument that other countries are getting richer at the expense of the US. In this respect, President Trump has been remarkably consistent. If you watch his interviews during the 80s, he argued as he does today. The difference is that back then, his main target was Japan, and today it is China. Why does Mr. Trump think that solving the twin deficit is vital for the United States? It sounds like a bad idea, especially because the world trade has grown tremendously under liberal economic order, and many countries have benefited from expanding international trade. But that's exactly his point. He thinks that even though imposing tariffs to all countries is a negative-sum game, the United States is stronger relative to others in a less liberal world. And I have to say, he's probably right on this point, given the resources and the military capacity that the country has. But here is a problem. Can we just move from one steady state to another? from today's position of the US to the one before 1970s? My answer is no. The adjustments that the households, firms, and governments must make for this transition is too much and too painful in the US as well as in the rest of the world, so that the attempt is most likely to fail. Let me give you another perspective. The very reason why the US dollar has continued to be the world's reserve currency after the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971 is that the US has become the largest importer and provided its currency for a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account globally. We can argue about the pros and cons of having the world's reserve currency, but wishing the twin deficits to go away and at the same time wishing the US dollar to remain the world's reserve currency is schizophrenic. It is like living in two separate realities that are actually connected. For this reason, what Trump is doing is confusing and will most likely undermine the long-run interests of the United States. First, it is not clear if his tariffs lead to reduction in trade deficits of the United States. Second, even if they do, it will be at the cost of consumers in the United States. Surely, countries like Japan will invest more in the US, but at the expense of efficiency, and consumers in the US again will eventually have to pay the cost. For the world economy, it will mean lower demand, and companies will try to find new markets. Facing all these troubles, Japan will not retaliate, but will seek compromises with the US. But at the same time, Japan will try to strengthen the trade relationship with the rest of the world, for example, the EU and Latin American countries. CPTPP, RCEP, and Mercosur are promising avenues. It is in Japan's interests to play an active role in those mega free trade agreements, as well as trying to save the WTO from dysfunction, together with the European Union and others. Lastly, for security issues, I believe the Trump administration understands the importance of Japan for keeping the US influence in the region. Japan will have to bear a higher defense cost, but I don't think that is necessarily bad, as it will also mean greater autonomy for Japan's policy, even in the security sphere. It will not change the fact that the US will continue to be the most important ally, but Japan will seek more multilateral cooperation, as exemplified by the cooperation among Japan, the UK, and Italy to build a next generation fighter jet. To conclude, I see Trump's policy as a symptom of the relative decline of the US power and influence in the world, and not as a cause. We all must prepare for the changing world order. For those of us in East Asia, this trend is particularly alarming as many countries in the region have an export-oriented strategy and rely on US dollar. We should not act unilaterally, but we should find a multilateral solution to avoid falling into an equilibrium with less trade and lower welfare. These are my thoughts on tonight's topic. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to the following discussions.
Thank you. I think a lot of wisdom in your words. So, because you are saying that I use the word tariff war, so you are saying it's not really a war unless you decide to make it a war. So, very, very, very wisely articulated. Thank you. And as you rightly summarized, uh, the world has to sort of reinvent itself to deal with both the declining aspect of US power as well as the declining influence that it will carry on the other economies. So we will have to reinvent. So in that context, I have some questions which will because I gave the example of Japan's dependence on, for example, the auto industry or auto machinery, electronics. Um, so you as a nation have been focusing on um, U.S. market because it's one of the biggest markets. Um, will this type of protectionism create a vulnerability, uh, uh, I mean, in the short term? And can Japan afford to continue its current export concentration, given the rising trade tensions, not just Japan, not just US, but maybe other countries may also do that later.
So should I
Yes,
comment on
please.
your?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, I so okay. It is not the first time that Japan is under pressure,
I
that
see.
the automobile industry is under US pressures.
Mm.
We have experienced multiple rounds of trade negotiations with the United States, even starting in the 80s. The automobile industry got or suffered a blow after the Plaza Accord in 1985, when the Japanese yen was sharply appreciated by the interventions in the foreign exchange market by back then the G5 countries. But in the following years, what Japanese automobile industry did was basically shifting its production base more and more in the United States and other parts of the world. I mean, that doesn't mean that the tariff or even appreciation of Japanese yen does not matter for the automobile industry. As you correctly pointed out, it is still the most important industry in Japan. And Japanese automakers sell more cars outside Japan than inside Japan. But increasingly more, these cars are not directly exported from Japan, but actually produced, for example, in North America, right? And So, in a sense, Japan is no longer this very export-driven economy. As a matter of fact, in the past decade, Japan has been running more often trade deficits than surplus. Um, Still, Japan's current account remains positive every year, but that is because the returns from Japan's investment overseas compensates the trade deficit Japan has uh, with the rest of the world. In fact, U.S. service export to Japan is very big. Um, so that includes like, you know, all the platform services and data centers and intellectual property rights and so on. But the return from Japan's investment kind of exceeds the trade deficits, and that's why Japan still runs current account surplus. But Japan is no longer the trade surplus nations that I think still many people think of Japan. So that means basically Japan has, as a country, has been accumulated overseas assets. And it is often the forgotten fact that still today, in net terms, Japan has the largest overseas assets in the world, right? So even though, so in short, even though these tariffs, of course, are disturbances and it creates uncertainty, Japan is still in the negotiation with the United States, and we don't know whether this 25% will remain at the end or these two countries will reach any other agreements. But whatever happens, I do believe that these Japanese multinational car makers will find a way, whether it's directly investing more in the United States or as how they have done, not just in the United States, but in Canada and Mexico and other countries, as well as finding new markets, right? US is still a very big market, but the growth is slowing down. On the other hand, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in India, the markets are growing. So, as you again pointed out, uh, the world is changing, and we also have to think of the long-term trend, which is we also have to consider the relative decline of the United States and its also weakening influences in the region. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Just a question related with what you just now said. Um, I understand your point that at the beginning you said that Japan is not at retaliation mode, but on a negotiation mode. Um, I think Indian government has similarly taken a approach of negotiation, um, but the negotiation is going towards a bilateralism rather than a unilateral approach or globalized approach. So, in terms of these tariff wars, which are even, yeah, okay, tariffs, I won't say war, in terms of the tariffs, creating acceleration of a decline of multilateral trade systems. As you said, WTO, how to prevent a total collapse of that. Because if that WTO concept or multilateral concept fails, it will lead to again maybe push us back to the concepts maybe many years ago, where we used to have fragmented, politically driven trade blocs. And will all this uh, mean, what does it mean for global economic stability in the, say, short term or medium term, or even in the long term? And so the second question linked with that is, I understand that you are no longer a trade, I mean, pushing products, but you have done wise investments in various assets across the globe, which is reaping you benefit and leading to a net positive in terms of your account. But have our people, not just Japanese, but other, miscalculated the geopolitical risks embedded in this global supply chain strategy? Or is it something that that risk was always there, but it has only sort of become brought more into focus? So I have two parts to this question. The first part was more to do with a global aspect about the death of multilateralism. And second is the focus on the global supply chain, whether it is a good thing or this realignment is was long overdue. What do you think?
Um, yeah, first of all, I think I share your concerns on possible dysfunction of the WTO. That's going to be a huge problem. But I think, fortunately, I think among the leaders of big economies in the world, Mr. Trump is quite unique. I think no other leaders think of the world economy and international trade like him. So what that means is, at least meanwhile, as we face a lot of uncertainties with how the Trump administration's policy are going to be, we have to defend the system. We have to defend the liberal order, even without United States, because I think there will be no way that any leaders in the world can convince Mr. Trump. Otherwise, I think he really lives in his own world, and he will not let himself, influenced by anyone else. Yeah, but I remain optimistic that in that respect, the rest of the world is actually quite united. I see a stronger also interest, for example, in European Union to work closer with Japan. I think even countries like China will take this chance to fill in the gap and the void that United States left or is going to leave in many parts of the world. Because it is only in China's interest. I think China knows very well that it has grown rapidly, benefiting from the liberal order, and it is not in China's interest to go back to the world, as you said, where countries are more protectionist and less liberal in terms of international trade. On your second point on, I think, global supply chains, I think we have seen, again, multiple disruptions of global supply chains, even in the recent past. We had COVID-19, and then, of course, we had also the first Trump administration and now the second. And I wouldn't say that we predicted that Trump will impose such extreme tariffs, not just on selected countries, but across the board, including its closest trading partners like Canada and Mexico, and also its closest ally like Japan, and many countries in Southeast Asia where the production chain shifted from China. They are now facing even higher tariffs than US trading partners. So that's a huge disruption. But again, I think multinational companies, even though their exposure to the United States is big, again, US is not the only big economy in the world. So I do think that they're able to adjust in the long run, at least, or in the medium to long run. Even though in the short run, of course, there are a lot of confusions and uncertainty, right, is the biggest enemy for global business or investing in anywhere. So for sure, we will see short-term, drop in consumption or investment in various parts of the world, probably. Things like M&A, merger and acquisitions will go down simply because I think the mood currently is not very good. But I think in the long run, the multinational corporations will come to terms with these changes and will readjust their global supply chain. Yeah, I might be over optimistic, but that's my view.
So, do you think, I mean, just as a follow-up to that, do you think this realignment of the supply chain you are saying was anyway, you had already predicted that and it was to happen, but it may only accelerate as because of this type of um, protection that is happening?
Yeah,
That's
I
what you
think
say.
you're right. I think you're right.
Okay.
The industry know that the growing markets are elsewhere. It might be in Southeast Asia, it might be in India, in the future it might be in Africa. But of course, again, as you also said, in the short term, there'll be a lot of disturbances, but these changes are to be expected. Of course, we don't know exactly when and how fast. And as you said, I think Trump accelerated some of these trends in a way that we could not have predicted before. But yeah, I think for any companies, diversification today is a norm. And yeah, even though there are short-term disturbances, I think especially if the US policy becomes a constant, if Trump's policy becomes a constant, they will find new markets.
Right, right, right. In a lighter vein, Dr. Kikuchi, there is a very quotable quote which says, only idiots refuse to change their minds. So, whether that applies to our friend President Trump, that is a debatable point, I guess.
Yeah.
But having said that, within India, which is also following a non-confrontational approach to the US, there is a lot of flack internally within India, as well as I think about both Japan and India's diplomatic postures, are they have they limited its ability or their ability to push back against the targeted US tariffs? So this is slightly economic but also political question. What do you think? Is this type of non-confrontational approach as against China's very confrontational response?
Yeah,
Do you think
yeah,
it is limiting us, or is it a positive in the longer run?
yeah. I think it's a very interesting question, and but I think Japan today is not the same as Japan, let's say in the 80s, when Japan also faced a severe, you might call it trade war with United States. Back then, I think Japan really compromised and basically accepted a lot of requests that United States imposed on Japan. I think today Japan is in a very different position. First of all, Japan's export surplus with United States is not that big. In the 80s was absolutely the largest in the world, but today probably it's still in the top 10, but not in the top 5. Um, Also, the world outside Japan and United States has changed a lot, right? For most of us, our biggest trading partner is no longer United States, but China. And yeah, and I think that also affects how the Japanese administration negotiates with United States. I think they said it clearly. Of course, it is not in, I think, Japan's national interest to really retaliate and confront United States. That's not how Japan is made up after the Second World War. But still, I think Japan, there are some areas where Japan will not just easily give in. And I think that it's going to be a quite tough negotiations. It's not that the Japanese side will accept whatever United States is saying, because Japan also knows, as we have been discussing, the declining US power and interest and so on. So I think Japan has, even though it is not the Japanese way of doing things, I think uh, the administration has more cards to play with than in the past. I don't know about India, so I think that's I'd like to hear from you. But let me just give you also another quote, which I like.
Uh,
It's actually from Charles Darwin, okay, who
okay.
said, "It is not the strongest who survive, but those who adapt." I think that's what is now required from all of us. Yeah.
Fantastic. Very good. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, one of the triggers for this question was that internally in India, there's a lot of debate whether our debate and also, I would say, disagreement that the government is too soft.
Hmm.
So, do you find is Japan speaking in one tongue, or internally are there any opposition to the official stand that the government has been taking?
There might be some oppositions in the parliament. I think
Hmm.
some wants a stronger stance against United States. But really, again, I do think that it is, in a way, opportunity for Japan too to um, think broader, okay, and not just think that forever we can rely on United States. And I think it is really now a moment where Japan has to think about how to survive in the region, in the world, even when its closest ally are not so kind to us.
Right.
Right? So I think there might be a different degree in the stances, how to negotiate with United States, but I think almost everyone is on the same boat in pressing us to think harder and to think, beyond just relying on the United States, which personally I think is a positive trend, because it simply also means probably the international trade and even the international financial and monetary system that really centers around United States, and which also resulted in the huge accumulation of US government debts and so on, that's not sustainable forever. And we have to, I think, yeah, de-imagine how we can survive, yeah, in the world. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, Slightly away from economics, if I may, also take you through the geopolitics of the region. All the government, I mean, Japan as a nation has had economically, I would say, stagnation. At least that's how it looks to the outside world for almost a decade and a half. So, to what extent has that put pressure? Has it creating or undermining its regional influence and strategic independence, or um, that this type of less dependence on US is going to increase Japan's regional influence? So that is one question I had. Of course, linked with that was the second question about the security ties with US. Even India is involved in that. Is that also going to compromise Japan's freedom, just like India's freedom, to define its own economic strategy, or is this a good way, as you were saying earlier, is a good trigger for us to both our nations to go away from the US umbrella?
On the last decades in Japan, it is interesting, but I think, I mean, you're absolutely right that Japanese economic power has waned over the last decade. Um, if you think about this, even in the mid 90s, Japan's GDP was bigger than Southeast Asia, China, and India combined.
Right.
Now, China's GDP alone is, I don't know, almost 3 times of Japan. So the world has completely changed. And Japan's position in the world has completely changed. But interestingly, I've I think Japan's soft power has actually increased.
Nice.
Uh, that's not the hard power, but things like CPTPP,
Um,
I think it was unthinkable 30 years ago, that Japan, after even though the United States withdrew from the negotiation, continued its own path and then, negotiated with rest of the members to rescue the TPP, which then became CPTPP. And I think that also shows that unlike the 80s or the late 80s, which was the peak of Japanese economy when Japan had a lot of economic power and financial power, in the past 3 decades, Japan has become more open. Japan has invested a lot overseas. Also, within Japan, there are changes. Obviously, now the Japanese corporations, probably 30 to 40% of their sales or profits or production are overseas. In the 80s, it was just 5%, and now it's 30 to 40%. And you can see that Japan's interest has also changed along with these developments. So I think it is really today in Japan's interest to defend the liberal economic order. Unlike in the past, where Japan's power came more from growing and expanding domestic economy. Right? I think that's a major shift that has occurred in the last 30 years. What that implies for security, again, I think the trend is similar. In the past, Japan would have just said the US Japan alliance is a cornerstone. As long as we keep that alive and strong, we are safe. We are under the US nuclear umbrella and nobody can touch Japan. Obviously, that's changing too. Japan also faces, I would not like to say military threats, but of course there are security risks in the regions. We don't know what kind of contingencies can occur, miscalculations. I don't think it is actually in any country's interest now to, in East Asia to launch a war or missiles. So, but yeah, you're right. And I think, as I also said in my comments, Japan will have to increase its defense budgets, and it will have to cooperate more with partners other than United States, and I think that it include India as well. Yeah, the so-called like-minded countries, I think, are coming closer together to, if not maintain the status quo, yeah, to make the security environment not that unstable.
As you rightly said, uncertainty is the root cause of all unhappiness in this world. so on all these fronts, we need to secure ourselves, reduce uncertainty as much as possible. But vis-a-vis this, I have the final question because a lot of questions are there from the audience. So we will address that immediately after this final exploration that I have with you. This the way we are now going towards the global trade negotiations, etc., whether it is bilateral or multilateral, um, are they addressing, as per you, are they addressing the root causes or they are just focusing on managing the symptoms of deeper political fractures that are visible. So that was one major doubt or questions that comes up. And second element there was how credible are the prospects for the new trade deals in a environment. Trade deals means multilateral trade deals in a very protectionist climate that we are seeing now.
Okay, I like to first know what the root cause is. Do you have any do you have any suggestions what the really root cause are?
No, no. What I meant by
Yeah.
root cause is whether they are addressing
Mhm.
the deeper one. Of course, root cause is uh, like Trump type of person coming in and causing, or Putin type of guy coming and causing. So these are uh, hopefully aberrations.
Mhm.
But uh, as you rightly said, fortunately, it is not a all global leaders are not like Trump, or all global leaders are not like Putin. So if you remove these two big outliers, there is a general agreement that people are wanting stability, wanting a global order, etc. But that is one aspect. But the ideal state of trade is that, going back, whoever is strongest in whatever will make it and supply to the others, etc. But the root cause there would have been that people do not appreciate it and want to grow everything locally, things like this. So that is what I meant, whether we are going back to the economic principles, that whoever can do it cheapest and the best should make it and supply, or um, we are shortcutting it due to other pressures.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I got more ideas from you. I would say the root causes of what we see today in many countries in United States or even in Europe are, I think, the consequences of globalization and how each country has dealt with globalization. Um, for example, President Trump, I think, laments that the manufacturing industry in the United States has disappeared, and the United States have to buy all the manufacturing goods from China and other countries. And without the manufacturing industries, you could argue they do not have enough employment opportunities for the middle class, and therefore it also leads to inequality and so on and so forth. But I think for all these problems, a country like United States, this is my view, cannot blame China. I think at the end, it is a political choice they made in the past. You cannot just look at the trade deficit the United States runs with China and the rest of the world, but you also have these thriving tech companies in the United States, the Magnificent Seven, that just the market capitalization of these seven companies account for, I don't know what, 40% of the US market capitalizations, you know. And these corporations for sure have been lobbying the government, changing the regulations in favor of them so that they can monopolize the market. And that's a huge problem. it is not just a problem in the United States, but for the rest of the world too. And we know that these companies even don't, or they pay little taxes. Okay, so that's a big problem. So these, I think, are the root cause. But you cannot blame the globalization for these things because it is essentially a public policy question in each country. We
Okay.
know it is not just international trade that can cause disturbances and realignment of industries and so on, but it could be also technological advances like AI, or it could be also climate change. A lot of things are happening in the world. I think it is each country's and each government's responsibility how to deal with these shocks and to create let's say a fairer societies in many respects. And I think that also goes for the rise in the right wing politics in Europe. Uh, it could be that many governments or countries have miscalculated the consequences of mass immigration in those countries. They have failed to implement policies that better integrate these immigrants in those societies and create also a feeling among the stakeholders in each society that they are actually benefiting, from immigration or international trade or globalization. Yeah, but we should not forget that beside the problems that we see, there are also beneficiaries. And often in this case, the beneficiaries are multinational organizations that operate globally and do not necessarily benefit the locals, but reap great benefits out of this globalized world, right? And who can control them, who can regulate them? It has to be, yeah, the responsibility of governments in every country in the world. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
And okay, for trade deals, I think that's more simple. Yeah, I would invite India to start the negotiation again to join RCEP, right?
Right.
And I think you know that UK, even though they left European Union, UK remains to be an internationally very open economy. So they have already joined the CPTPP, and there are other applicants for CPTPP too. It remains to be seen how the CPTPP countries will, negotiate with China, for example. That's going to be a big challenge. But I think in Japanese government minds, having again a closer trade relationship with European Union. For example, it's not unthinkable that EU as a whole will have some kind of relationship with CPTPP. I think that's the way forward. Yeah, thank you.
Right, right. Thank you. I think there are, as I said, a lot of questions from the audience. We will take a few. I was wondering before we continue, Kikuchi, Dr. Kikuchi, is it okay to share your uh, email ID for any questions that the audience may have? Uh, will you be able to uh, take those type of questions as a trigger after this
You mean
session?
by email?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, of course, you can share your email address with the audience. And if anyone is interested in getting in
Oh,
touch with me, yeah, they're
thank you.
welcome to do so. Yeah.
Very happy to hear that.
But of course, if I'm swept with 100 questions, I'm not sure if I can answer all of them. But yeah, we
No,
will
no.
see. Yeah.
You can select and reply. Uh, just there's a lot. I mean, at the initial stage, you this is from the audience questions um, about the predominance of US dollar and how maybe the Chinese yuan or even the gold standards people are looking at as an exchange going backwards again. So, how likely do you think, as a macroeconomist, do you think that this is possible in the emerging world economic order? China yuan currency or any other, maybe EU, or going back to the gold?
Yeah, I think gold standard for me is not very realistic, even though I know that even among the economists, they are big fans of gold standard because that means basically, yeah, low level of inflations and more stable economy. And I mean, in the past periods, I think the gold standard periods were also periods where international trade expanded because of the certainty, that the fixed exchange rates have provided. But going back to that would mean that all the countries will be restrained in their conduct of monetary policies, and there's so much now, you know, liquidity and money creation everywhere in the world, so that I don't think it is very realistic to go back to the gold standard period. Now, if US dollar, the things about world reserves currency is that there is a huge network externality, right? So I think it is actually in everybody's interest if there is a one strong currency and stable currency that everybody uses, because that lowers the transaction costs and exchange rate risks and so on and etc. But if the issuer of that country, and in this case United States, would no longer see it beneficial to keep the US dollar as a reserve currencies, there got to be alternative. But I think the reality of the world today is that there is no really alternative except the euro, which is already, a global currency, and within European Union, most of the trades are settled in euro and so forth. But again, for countries in Asia in particular, we depend on US dollar too much, so that I think for example, switch to from US dollar to Chinese RMB is also unrealistic, especially given the fact that China capital account still remains relatively closed, and I don't think anytime soon the Chinese government has an interest to have a fully open capital account and free flow of capital in and out of the country. So I think China's approach would be more gradual. But then, whether we can really have the infrastructure of multi-currency trading system, that, I don't have the yeah, I don't have the foresight into that possibility. But that's an interesting thought, and I think we should definitely think about probably promoting more regional currencies, diversifying the risks, and make the best use of technology that we today have, whether it's blockchain technologies or central bank digital currencies. I think there are promising opportunities. And yeah, I think
Okay.
I don't have a clear answer what the alternative to US dollar is, but let us keep thinking hard.
Right. Thank you. I think that was a very. But one question which keeps coming up, because in a democracy, hopefully, unlike Putin's Russia, uh, Trump will not continue beyond his second term. So, will uh, will all these things that he's disrupting, will it revert itself? Do you think in the once Trump departs?
Uh, Hopefully, at least some of the erratic behaviors. But again, as we have discussed, many of these things are long-term US trends, right? And after the first, Trump administration, Biden, for example, had a chance to rejoin CPTPP, but it didn't, right? And I think the frustration of, let's say, middle class or lack of manufacturing capacity and growing inequality, I think all these problems will remain even after, hopefully, Trump stepping down after his second term. We don't know. There are speculations that he's going to change the constitution, whatever. I don't know. But I mean, he's also getting older. He's also a human being, right? So yeah, yeah. But I think most of the general trends will remain, but hopefully these erratic behaviors and his art of deals with creating uncertainty and letting the opponents confused. I think that we hope that will no longer be true after his administration. Yeah.
But thank you. This Japan has been looking at US as a major partner in the initial days, and now, as you rightly said, it has become China. But are you looking at considering the geopolitical risks that China is with all its aggressive behavior? Do you have a China plus policy which includes other countries, or what exactly is Japan looking at in the broader economic sphere?
So China plus in terms of
Price,
economy,
yeah,
not
China plus
security.
one.
Yeah, sure, sure. I think you know it is also getting harder to compete in China. As you know, there is uh, excess supply and overcapacity in many sectors in China. Many Japanese companies, including automobile companies like Nissan, have decided to withdraw from the market.
Yes.
And that's one because there is really, I think, overproduction and excess capacity in China, but also uh, Chinese workforce have become increasingly more expensive. So I think the trend that many of these manufacturing firms started shifting their production bases away from China into Southeast Asia, and now India is one of the promising destination, right? Not just Japanese companies, but also Apple has announced that they're gonna produce iPhones in India and so on. That's also again a long-term trend. It didn't really start with Trump administration. Trump administration might have accelerated the trend, but yeah, not just China plus one, but as you know, Thailand, for example, has been the major manufacturing base for Japan in Southeast Asia, especially for automobile industry. But also there's a concept of Thailand plus one, right? So I think diversification in general has been going on now for decades, and I think the trend will only continue. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I think you have been a great inspiration and a very positive outlook in this very disruptive and confusing environment. You have given us a very honest and 360 perspective, because you started by saying that you can understand Trump's initial motivations. I think that itself put us all in a different frame of mind. As we have said, okay, we are going to hear a very balanced perspective rather than just blaming Trump or Trumpism, as some people call it. So truly appreciate your patient answering, and also filling in for the void of Professor Urata's absence by your incisive thought and thought-provoking discussions. And we are also grateful that you were able to you have accepted to answer some of the questions, because there are many more questions due to lack of time we will not be able to address in this forum, but they will the participants of this webinar would be in touch with you to take this forward. I would like to end this by warmly inviting you to come to IIM Bangalore and speak to our fraternity. And that will be a great opportunity for us to learn more from you. Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank
Kikuchi.
you, Mr. Ratnam, for being a wonderful host. And of course, I look forward to any opportunity that I might have in the future to visit Bangalore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.